It's nearly afternoon, so I'll start with afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome to this live breakout session, Growing Globally in Today's Climate, as part of the Recruitment and Employment Conference 2021. I'm David Slater. I am KPMG's Director of International. I'm the facilitator for today's session. I'm joined by what was going to be three, but now is two expert guests. I've got Mark Hutton, a colleague of mine who's a director in our international tax practice, and I've got Lexi Brewster, the international business director of Generate. I'll let them introduce themselves further when it's their turn to speak. We've got 45 minutes, which is not long, but we have essentially four key objectives that I want to walk you through over the next 45 minutes. We're going to explain why now is a good time to consider being more international, exporting, internationalization. That's a good point for my slides to freeze. Anyway, we're going to introduce the why, the where, and the how questions you should be asking yourself when you're looking to do business overseas. We're going to highlight the early tax practicalities that need to be considered when you're entering new international markets, and we'll outline the key contractor management considerations when operating internationally. I'm going to set the context for the first of these two objectives, and then I'm going to hand over to Mark to take you through the tax practicalities. Now, when I say tax, I don't want you to think that this is going to be a dull and boring presentation, because when we talk about tax, it covers a multitude of issues that are important to when you're operating internationally. It talks about getting the right legal entity. It talks about developing the optimum operating model, getting paid, more importantly than anything, I guess, and coping with relevant compliance issues. So don't let the word tax put you off. And then I'll ask Lexi from Generate to talk about it from a global payroll perspective, talk a little bit about what Generate does. And then what I'll try and do is get into a conversation with my expert guests. And I hope that you will all use the live chat to ask us some questions. It's going to be, we're going to talk about the football if you don't ask us any questions. So please put your questions in the live chat. I will put those to our panelists. We will answer anything that's relevant, and hopefully in 45 minutes time, we'll be able to give you a very full picture of operating internationally. And then at the end of the session, I'm going to ask each of my guests for their top tip as a takeaway as you move into the break. Okay, so let's look a little bit about, or let's talk about the UK political and economic context. I mean, at the moment, there are a number of issues in my mind which are really important and should be sort of making you think about being more international rather than less. Obviously, EU transition, it's always in the newspapers, but the fact that we've left the European Union and the UK economy is impacted by that. If you're putting all your growth hopes on the performance of the UK economy, then I think that's a rather limiting strategy. If you think there are lots of markets that are going to be growing more quickly than the UK, or at least on a par, maybe it's time to think about operating in those markets rather than just putting all your eggs in the UK basket. Obviously, COVID has impacted the UK and lots of other economies. But as we come out of COVID, it's worth thinking about which markets are doing better, which markets are unlocking, where there is performance that you can tap into as you think about growing your business. The UK's sovereign trade policy. The UK is negotiating a number of free trade agreements. Obviously, the one with the European Union has been most important for people, but there's lots in the pipeline. You'll have seen in the news about the Australian FTA, but there are others. And I think what I'm saying is keep an eye on what the government is doing, because the UK government wants to play to the strengths of the UK services industries and is putting into these new free trade agreements lots of helpful clauses that helps UK services business to compete internationally. And hopefully within the next 3 years, these free trade agreements will cover 80% of the markets with which the UK does business. There's a lot of trade protectionism going on. You need to just keep an eye on that. And the European Union is an interesting example, because when it comes to the movement of people, there are lots of new regulations that impact not only people with UK passports travelling and doing business in the European Union, but also the UK is putting its own immigration policies in place. So you need to be mindful of this. For example, who knew that to do market research in Austria, you need a work permit? Nobody cared before, but now it's something that you need to think about if you're going to be travelling yourself to do business in lots of countries overseas, but also in the European Union now that free market has ceased. And the one thing that I want to point out that I think is probably the key takeaway, beware of the competition. Are there people in your industry that are coming up with new agile, innovative, tech-enabled models that are going to compete with you, possibly displace you, possibly make it more difficult for you to compete going forward? Having an eye on the competition and thinking about, as they develop, where can I go where I can also win more business? So lots and lots of issues that are making me, as well as lots of small and medium-sized businesses, think about being more international. So we've left the European Union, we're outside the single market. I think there's some questions to ask ourselves from a competitiveness perspective. If you've got clients in the EU already, now that the UK is a third country and your single market access is not what it was, how do you continue to service them? What changes in your business model do you need in order to continue to service your clients? And then how do you compete with with competitors that already have a base in the single market? Do you now need a base in the single market in order to continue to compete? Ask yourself this question. If you're a German customer or a French customer or anyone in the European Union, do you want a provider that's based solely in the UK? Or would you perhaps prefer someone who's actually got a presence also in the single market? And if that's the case, do you therefore need to be in the single market? So I think from a competitiveness perspective, this is really a very interesting time to consider whether you need to be more international rather than keeping only to the UK market. So going global is the phrase that we use when we're talking to small and mid-sized businesses about being more international. I think there are two key questions that everybody asks, and they certainly ask of us: how are we going to grow? What are the things that are going to enable us to grow? And how do we manage the risks that come with growth, particularly in a changing business environment? You know, the UK economy is growing again, but it fell a long way because of COVID. So don't get sort of too excited about the fact that the UK is now growing at 6%. We fell by nearly 11. So think about the relative growth across other markets when we're thinking about growth. Certainly, all the research will tell you that becoming a more international business gives you a better diversified risk profile, i.e. you can earn money in other markets that are maybe doing better relatively than the UK. And international companies, those that are competing internationally, tend to be more productive by taking advantage of a wider customer, supplier and talent pool. But don't just take my word for that. Here's a quote from our current Secretary of State for Trade and Investment. Research shows that organizations that export tend to be more profitable, innovative and resilient. This element of competition certainly helps your business to be more competitive. On the left is our guide to going global, to getting ready to compete in markets that are overseas. And I can certainly send you a link to this guide, but I'm going to run through some of the key elements of it. You'll be pleased to know that I'm not trying to sell you the guide. What I want you to do is just think about the various steps and apply them to your business. Ask yourself the questions that we would ask of you, and think about every step in order that nothing happens by accident. Is it an opportunity? Is it a threat? Nothing should happen by accident. Consider the ramifications of every decision. Now, we use a model called EDGE. EDGE talks about explore, develop, govern, and then evaluate. Now, I'll take you through each of these steps, but it's an easy model just for you to think through. And the model is focused on you. It's not focused on us. It's about how can we, using this model, enable you to compete and affect business in the chosen market, in the markets that you choose. And you need to ask yourself, first off, some key questions. Why am I going to be more international? Hopefully, I've answered some of that already. Where should I go? And how, more importantly, can I do this? And this is where I'm going to ask my other two panelists to come in and comment in a moment. And the where is the why is, how do I assess the opportunity? How can I make sure I've got the right market research and economic and comparative analysis? What is my entry strategy going to be? Am I going to try and do it myself, i.e. open up and do it organically? Am I get someone to represent me? Do I go into business through a joint venture with somebody else? Do I make an alliance? Do I perhaps acquire another business that's operating overseas? And throughout all of these issues, due diligence and contractual support, getting these things right is really important. And the sooner that you take professional advice in these areas, the less likely you are to make errors. And I think the one thing that I've learned over the years is people rush into making business decisions without perhaps taking advice or asking the right questions. And it costs an awful lot more time, effort, resource, and money to unpick poor decisions than it does to make good decisions in the first place. Now, I'm going to give you access to all these slides, but on this idea of exploring the market, the market entry approach that we take is the why is about defining the ambition. What is it you actually want to achieve by being more international? And I've set out there some of the key considerations. I don't need to go through all of them now by setting the context, but you can see them there. Look at the growth strategy, understand the strategic object, think about the finances, and also think about the key considerations for each market. Think about the where. Are you going into a market based on size? Are you going into the market based on opportunity? What sort of things are going to define which market you want to play in? And then the how. This is the really crucial bit, because lots and lots of people can give you the theory of the why and the where, but how do you practically affect business in your chosen market? And we're going to come to that in a little bit more detail. So that will be the explore part, the E part of EDGE. Once you've decided on the market, you've got your entry strategy, you're going into it, you've got to think about how you develop your footprint. And the key thing to think about here is the more international your business, the more challenges as a manager, as part of your management team, that you're going to be faced with. Now, that doesn't mean that you should be put off. It just means you need to be aware of the challenges that are going to come from being more international, particularly now we're outside the single market. People moving between territories becomes a consideration that you need to think about. There are limits now to how long a UK passport holder can spend in the European Union. There are all sorts of work permit conditions. So workforce movements and tracking your own people, as well as you service your clients, making sure that they're tracking their people is really, really important. You don't want to get on the wrong side of the tax or the immigration authorities of any jurisdiction. That is a very painful place to be.
And David, we've had one question actually already, just as we're sort of on the topic, which is thinking the other way. What are you seeing in terms of the challenges for EU businesses coming to the UK? Is that something you're starting to see or think? What are they having to think about?
Yeah, and it's a good question, because it's the same thing almost in reverse. The UK has put in place its own immigration policy that limits the movement of people based on rules that are now in place. So free movement has ended. You'll remember the mantra of take back control of our borders, etc. And things aren't the same as they used to be. People can come for visits, of course they can. People can come on business visits and conduct business meetings, but they can't work without the right permission. So I think that's a key consideration. The other thing, of course, is to think about, and I'm sure you'll cover this in your session, Mark, about now that the UK is out of the single market, what are the changes to the tax rules? What are the changes to VAT? What are the changes to moving your money between borders? So everything that I'm saying that UK businesses need to think about when they go international works exactly in reverse. And it really is about finding a good advisor and taking advice. It costs nothing to ask questions. At some point, an advisor will sort of say, right, I'm going to have to bill you. But don't be afraid to find them and ask questions. It's better to be informed than certainly
David,
not.
for UK businesses, there's a lot of other sources, as well as professional advisors like us, there are actually quite a few other sources of information as well, aren't there?
Well, I would always look to government first and foremost. The Department of International Trade gives lots of either free or subsidized advice. Their overseas network of embassies and high commissions is fantastic. You get to them, you can ask questions, they will give you their advice. Built on top of that is, of course, trade associations, and of course we're actually in the event of a trade association at the moment. You know, there's lots of staff within REC that can help with these sorts of questions or point you in the right direction. So if something is free, don't discount it. Go and take as much advice as possible. There's lots out there, and certainly, you know, our guide, and there's lots of other advisors with guides. Be informed, ask the right questions, and make sure that everything that you do is informed and not done by accident, because this can really trip you up.
Yeah, I think DIT specifically have some funds available at the moment, don't they, to help businesses get advice on international growth. So
yeah, you're right, and part of the grant system that DIT has at this very moment is to provide grants to enable small and medium-sized businesses to employ professional advisors. And I think it's up to £9,000 as a matched fund. So, you know, you can get up to £18,000 worth of advice. The government will give you half of that. Why would you not take advantage of it? You know, it doesn't have to be that difficult a decision. Just make sure you pick an advisor who understands the broader international picture rather than being solely focused on the UK. We can introduce you to DIT. I have no problem with that. You tend to hire a salesperson. Salespeople aren't generally very good at following any regulatory requirements in the market that they're operating. That's a CEO, that's a management decision. So please make sure you keep on top of whatever regulations are applicable to you in the market in which you're operating, because managing that risk is really important to your overall performance and your ability to compete and make money. And that's what you want me to do. I don't want to scare you or create peril, but it's just something to be aware of. Make sure you're on the right side, you're operating properly, get good advice, because that will help your profitability going forward. Things like VAT and customs duty can be really important here. I'm sure, Mark, you'll cover that in a moment. Make sure you've got the right assurance overseas, and make sure that, you know, if you're operating online and you're using technology, that you've got the right protections in place. Everybody gets attacked by hackers these days. So what sort of protections, and how are you controlling and protecting the data that you hold? Particularly important for the recruitment business, where you're holding quite a lot of personal data, and that, you know, you need to make sure that you're compliant with the regime in the UK as well as in the jurisdictions in which you are working. And then hopefully, as this proceeds and you keep going, keep evaluating how well you are doing. The key thing is not, once you've made a decision, to believe that it's always the right one. You need to evaluate at the outset what you're trying to achieve over what time frame, and take steps to make sure you're on board. Check yourself. You know, if you set things right, set things up properly at the beginning, it's easier to unwind if things don't go your way. So take the right advice, keep monitoring your performance, and make sure that if it's not going the way that you wanted it to go, or you thought that it might, that you understand why. And if you set it up properly, if you need to pull the plug, you can. If you've set it up wrongly, you might not be able to get out as easily as you went in and leave yourself with a whole load of liabilities. And if you need to close it down, there's help available, but if you've not set it up right, it'll be really difficult. So in conclusion of what I said, you know, international trade can be a really key driver of your growth. It can help you mitigate the risk from changes in the UK and broader business environment. This edge model that I've talked you through just helps you think through the various stages. But remember, this is all about you making the right decisions, you being able to compete and affect business in your chosen markets. With that, I'll hand over to you, Mark. I'll monitor the chat and I'll fire questions at you as they come along, and I'll give you your slide to talk through. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks, David. Hi, so I'm Mark Hutton. I'm an International Tax Director with KPMG, and I specifically focus on high growth and mid-market businesses based in the London region, but obviously I have counterparts across the whole of the UK. And what I wanted to do for the next 5 to 10 minutes is, I guess, talk through some of the key areas, as David said, that businesses encounter and think about when they start to set up their first, or operation in a country or into a new country they've not been in before. And as David also said, you know, a lot of these things aren't actually specifically about tax, but they are things that you need to be aware of the tax consequences of what you're doing. And often people can get themselves tied in knots a bit between legal advisors, local advisors, you know, and their customers actually asking for certain things and not know which way to go. So starting at the very basics, you know, you're a UK business, let's just assume, and, you know, you want to, you've seen an opportunity and you want to start trading in a new country. So you think, right, well, we need to get some people there. And, you know, from that very first step, you then need to think, well, how are we going to employ those people? Are they going to be contractors, third-party people, or are we going to establish a presence in that country? And that's very important because, you know, obviously the type of presence, entity you establish and how you employ and work with those people and your customers is going to have a big impact on the taxes you pay, but also the legal protections you have and your responsibilities in that country. So in principle, you have three main options when it comes to doing business in a country. You can either try and do business remotely. So, you know, a lot of our very tech-enabled businesses are obviously able to provide services into a country without a physical presence there. But what you need to be careful is obviously, and you have seen this from the G7 agreement that was signed a few weekends ago, increasingly governments are very conscious about, you know, overseas businesses extracting value from their country without having a presence. And so, you know, there's a lot of evolution of the tax rules here, and increasingly, you know, a digital presence can be as much as a physical presence. But currently, you know, it is possible to sell into a country remotely without a physical presence, but you need to be careful that the people and the interactions and the business trips you have there on the ground are fairly limited. You know, once you have some staff and an office and you're permanently based there, you are going to need to have an entity. And then you get yourself to two main choices, which is either to have a branch, or another name for that can be a permanent establishment, which is effectively just an extension of your existing UK company. And you will employ people locally through that, and it will pay tax in the country, but also all those profits will also just come back to your main UK company. There's no separate legal identity. And then the other option is obviously to set up a subsidiary. So a separate company incorporated under the laws of that country, and it's quite separate. And then, you know, a key difference then is, you know, you, as David said, that company will need its own governance, it will have its own legal identity and filings, and it will pay tax locally. And to bring the profits back, you'll obviously need to pay a dividend or, you know, have intragroup services, which bring the profits back to your main company in the UK. Now, you can, again, as I said earlier, you can tie yourself in knots thinking about which way to go. Generally, typically, businesses find that setting up a branch initially is the easiest. It's the most flexible, and it often can be shut down with the least administrative hassle. But what it doesn't give you is that local presence. And as David said, what we're increasingly seeing, especially in Europe, is that customers want to deal with a European company because it reduces their administration and their perceived risk of having to deal with a third country, now the UK. So a lot of our clients are setting up at least one European company under their UK company to facilitate that expansion into Europe. Right, moving on a bit from choice of legal entities, something we talked about and highlighted is that obviously it's quite a competitive landscape, and especially in places like the US and where you have state taxation, but also in emerging economies, there can be a lot of incentives for you to base your business in specific regions or parts of countries where they want to generate growth. So it's always good to speak to a local advisor, or as David said, use advice from the DIT to look at what local grants and incentives are available, because it could be quite different setting up an office and hiring people in a certain part of a country versus maybe just the capital. Moving on, one thing that people can often get caught up on is, well, how much funding do I need to put into this overseas company to get it up and running? And lawyers will get very caught up on, well, what share capital do you need? What debt do you need? Actually, it's possible to choose an operating model for that company whereby, for example, you can just agree with the UK company that you're going to reimburse it for its costs plus a small margin, such that it's never going to make a loss. And what that can do is provide a simple way to quite quickly get up and going without needing to think too far ahead about the capital structure of the business. Obviously, as the business grows, it might need capex, etc. You might need to put in more capital, but most of our clients set up with that simple operating model overseas of just having a cost base that they need for the business, and then recharging that back up to the UK head office. Some other things to flag on the right-hand side. Obviously, if you're doing business in a new jurisdiction, you'll need to think about their sales taxes. So in Europe, that's obviously VAT. But if you're going into the US market, they have a different system called GST, and it works quite differently to UK VAT. And what you need to be conscious in particular with the sales taxes is, even more so than corporate taxes, you can trigger liabilities in countries to register for filings and need to remit taxes, even if you're just doing business remotely. And often these have sort of economic thresholds, but it can simply be based on a number of transactions. So typically we see businesses, when they come to exit, an advisor will look at the global stuff and realize that while none of these can necessarily be that material, there's been lots of missed compliance obligations, and that can leave a big trailing footprint that needs tidying up. And so, as David said, just taking a little bit of advice as to what is the correct compliance procedure, what needs to be done, and making sure somebody, probably not your salesperson, someone from the finance team is taking care of those things. The other thing just to think about is, if you do go down the route of setting up a local company, you will need to think how that company is going to be governed. If you just run it all from the UK, actually what you will create is a dual resident company, because it will be both resident in the country where you've set it up and back in the UK where it's centrally controlled and managed. So what people need to do is think about who in that local jurisdiction is going to be the directors, and who's going to have that oversight and governance to stop that happening. And that can often be a reason why companies start with a branch, and then as you start to scale up and maybe have 10 or so or more people in a country, start to then think about incorporating that operation into a company. Okay, so that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour round. I seem to have escaped without any questions for the moment. So I'm going to hand over to Liz to talk a little bit more, I think, about the people aspects of.
Yeah, thank you. So, yes, basically, we are going to be providing a bit of an alternative. So, just to give you some bit of background, I've been in the contractor management market the last 3, heading up the international side of the business. Now, we are an FCSA and REC partner providing compliant solutions in over 95 countries around the world. But you might find that you might not have the business to essentially set up straight away in a country, and you're looking at help facilitate. So really, we enable recruitment companies really to focus on what they're best at, which is making placements, and leave the risk management and the compliance for us to look after, taking away that aspect from them. So we have a global network of accountants, in-country partners, and our own Generate entities, whereby we are managing to set people up within the country, tax compliance, seamlessly, taking away that panic of people who are moving from country to country, and they might not even know their own tax system, let alone a new country. So that's where we come in. There is no hard and fast rule in our business of how you set someone up. Effectively, what we've got to do is look at every situation the circumstances of the case, the country they're going to be working in, and figure out how it's appropriate to set somebody up. And we might be looking at employed solutions, we might be looking at self-employed solutions, or we might be talking about contractors who already have their own setup and where it might be appropriate to use. So as I said, we need to make sure that essentially, case by case, everything is looked at to make sure that a supply chain is safeguarded from non-payment taxes. Both David and Mark have brought up this about how it's important to make sure you're aware of not only your local UK laws, but also where you're placing people. So that's really where we need to come in. If we're looking at self-employed models throughout Europe, obviously for Europeans now, not so much Brexit.
Lexi, sorry, Lexi, just interrupt you. If you just stay closer to the microphone, your sound keeps dropping in and out. The participants are struggling to hear you.
Sorry. Okay, hopefully that's better.
Yeah.
Where we can appropriately provide self-employed models for people, we're literally setting them up in country within the local tax system. We're providing the accountancy and bookkeeping. We're providing the income tax filing, social security. So we're really managing the contractors for, although they of course do have to pay their own taxes, but we're there to ensure that the recruitment companies, candidates, where we provide employed solutions, we are the employer of record, all taxes are covered. And so again, everything's looked after. And I guess a lot of the time in Europe, there are some countries where it does work similarly to the UK umbrella model, but that is not always the case. And so really, you need to get in touch with us as early as possible to find out whether there may be any changes in how employment works in other countries, the type of benefits involved, so that your clients know and your contractors know from the very start. I mean, it's what they might be looking at. So yeah.
Alexi, what would you say are the typical issues you see that crop up that when people don't plan, that they sort of miss out?
So there are certain countries in Europe where they will not allow the use of foreign companies and they don't like the use of self-employed statuses. They have to have an employed option. And if you have already agreed a rate with the client, already agreed a rate with the contractor, and then via an employment model, employment costs are also deducted, the retention can be, and that's where a deal will fall through, because somebody might not want to work and receive 40%.
Yeah.
So it's really worthwhile getting in touch as soon as possible, seeing what the options are for the country in question, and then talking through what they might have to consider before they finalise the rates with clients and workers. So essentially, get us involved as early as possible. We provide calculations for salary or self-employed solutions in country to help not only guide them, but also educate them as to what they could be looking at for the certain countries. We obviously are aware of labour laws and what we can and can't do in countries. So essentially, it's growing globally without actually having to kind of incorporate and set up all of these offices. You can move people around without having to go that extra step.
Yeah, and I would definitely say, Lexi, I'm seeing a lot of my clients start to use that sort of service because, you know, as I sort of alluded to in my presentation, you know, there's an awful lot to think through, and it can take a while to, if you're trying to do it yourself, to get all of that local advice about what filings you need to do, you know, both on legal side and then getting money in and out of the country, you know, immigration, visas, all the different things. And so if you're expanding into one country and you think, okay, we're going to really invest in that, well, maybe it's worth all of that effort. But actually, most of my clients now want to expand into multiple countries at the same time, or people want to be flexible about where they're going to work because they can work remotely. And so actually, you know, you can't invest that as a smaller business. You can't invest in setting up in multiple countries all at the same time. And that's where I think the advantage of that sort of service, where you've already got a network set up, people can really make the most of it to expand quickly.
Yeah, exactly. And COVID has been a massive factor in that. It's really opened up the supply pool of their workforce, because people are enabled to work remotely. And we're seeing people sort of more assignments coming up in very strange, well, not strange, but obviously not previously favourable countries, because they can work from home. So, yeah. But then it's a case of how do you pay them? And it's and that's obviously where we are best placed to. So, yeah, I mean, I would say we have solutions in over 95 countries, but in the last few months, because of COVID and the remote working, we're adding countries quite quickly to our portfolio because of that very fact. And you're right.
Lexi, there's a question come in to that point saying, one of our audience members is interested in the GCC, so Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. Do you cover those geographies?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, those are countries where generally we're looking at employed solutions. And what I was saying before with regards to it, and nowhere is as flexible as the UK when it comes to employment. And when it comes to employment, I should say, not law. Not a lawyer. But where you've got the UK model where you can work 1 day, 1 week, 5 days the next, and have that flexibility, you don't get that outside of the UK. So you have to be in line with their model, their laws. And there are just a few more things to think about. So yeah, we can certainly help with the Middle East.
And you, Mark, what about advice for Saudi and the UAE from your perspective? Is anything particular to think about? I know we've got operations and offices and firms in those territories, but have you seen anything on those markets?
I think it's sort of what Lexi was saying. They're very different places to operate from the UK. They don't have the sort of typical corporate taxes that we have here in the UK. They have just introduced VAT. But it's a different sort of complexity, because often if you do go down the route of actually entering that market yourself, as in setting up your own entities, you're often required to have a local partner to work with you, which isn't something we're used to doing when we set up a business here in the UK. So there are some different aspects to doing business there, which people should plan for. If they're going down, I think what we've really highlighted is between Lexi and I is that you've got those two options of trying to avoid creating your own presences in countries to simplify your tax footprint, or going down the route of having to set up yourself in different geographies to expand.
Yeah, and it's a really good point when it comes to the UAE, for example, because the Supreme Council there did pass a law not so long ago saying you necessarily didn't need a local partner. However, from a purely operational and competitive perspective, my experience is without a local partner, you won't be able to get into the market, get the links that you need, and win the right business. So it's a great point, because it's really important to not only understand the compliance and the laws, but understand what model you need to compete. We've got 5 minutes left. Lexi, again, sometimes your sound's fading out, so keep leaning forward, because the folks are keen to hear what you say. Top tips, guys, as we come to the last 5 minutes. If there are just 1 or 2 things that you think every business should really nail and think about, what would they be? I'll come to you first, Mark, and then I'll go to Lexi. Mark.
Yeah. I think in terms of setting up in a new geography, think through that model you talked about, David, in the sense of why are you going there and what are you going to need and what operating model are you going to have in that geography, because then that will hopefully start to inform which route do you go down. Do you try and not create a taxable presence there, and then use like services like Lexi was talking about to help manage that compliance for the individuals who you do want to hire, or are you going to go and set something up there yourself because you see it as a long-term plan where you want to really build out a base? And I think, as you said, thinking about that up front and getting it right so that you don't create a load of headaches for yourself down the line is the biggest mistake that I see people make. They let things just build up without planning, and then that ends up creating them a lot of tax headaches when they either want to sell their business or when they eventually get a sort of tax audit from a local tax authority.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Lexi?
Actually, pretty similar, to be honest. Understanding the models that work for the country so that you know what you can offer, and otherwise it falls through at the last hurdle. Understanding and this is prior to even coming to us, understanding licensing, models in question, and then getting us involved as early as possible, basically, so we can help them through it.
Yeah, no, it's good advice. And I think from me that there's a couple of things, but it's about identifying what is a real opportunity in market and what actually is a threat. And by that, I mean, don't become international by accident. People will see you on the web, they will see your website, they will come to you and say, I need you to help, or I want you to help service me in such and such a territory. When that happens to you, just think about, is this really the opportunity that I can fulfill at this moment? Or actually, if I run into it blind, is this a threat to my business that's going to undermine what I've been doing over the last 10, 20 years, however long it is? So it's that being able to differentiate and analyze what's an opportunity, what's a threat, and what are all the areas and variables that I need to think about before I take the decision. Right, on that note, thank you everybody for tuning in. Thank you to my guests, Lexi Brewster from Generate, Mark Hutton from KPMG. I've put everybody's email on the slides. You'll get the slides through our colleagues at REC. So please don't hesitate to fire us emails, ask us questions. If you need anything, please come our way. You need an introduction to DIT, etc. Please come our way. Thank you very much to REC for putting on this conference and for giving us the platform to talk to you today about going global and competing in a changing business environment. A little bit of housekeeping. There's now going to be a 30-minute break. So what I would advise you to do is, why not check out all of the exhibitor booths, visit the event chat, or look at the on-demand videos, and then please come back to the live stage at 1:10 for the second panel discussion. So with that, I'll bid you all good day. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks to my guests, and we'll see you all soon and hope to hear from you. Thanks very much, everyone. Goodbye.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.